In this tutorial, we will have a more in-depth look at melee weapon impact sound effects. I will begin by explaining the graph. Then I will discuss reverberation techniques a bit. As usual, you can find this graph inside the melee weapons folder. It's quite a simple graph, and we have used this node many times in previous tutorials. So I will concentrate on important points only. Firstly, for force mode, we use exponent mode. Cosine mode is good if you need both attack and decay phases. But for loud and strong impact effects, we have a nearly zero attack phase and a long decay phase. So exponent mode is better for these effects. Okay, we set the spawn rate to 100 and the spawn chance to 1 here. And the spawn duration is 30 milliseconds. So this node will generate 3 impacts before stopping. The reason why we want multi-impacts here instead of 1 is to make it feel stronger. Also give it some variations and vibrations. If I only create 1 impact by setting this to 0, you can feel that it feels a bit monotonic. We also do this in the old graph by using a multi-impact synthesizer node. But this is quite slow. The setup is quite complicated. This new version is much better, both in terms of speed and quality. Okay, the difference between impact strength and amplitude scale is that impact strength will affect the strength of the generated force, while the amplitude scale will change the amplitude of each frequency in our model separately, and the amplitude of each frequency is capped between the range -1 and 1. It might sound complicated, but for most users, you can just set impact strength like this, and leave this duration factor at default, and forget about them. They will be handy if you need a way to control your sound effect based on user swing speeds, like in VR games or some physics simulator games. The impact duration for exponential force mode is very simple. Use a longer duration if you want the output to be louder and last longer. Okay, the model setup is also pretty simple. We just use a decay comp node to limit the minimum decay rate. This is done to control the tail of the effect. Like for normal, simple, fast-hitting effects, you want a short tail. While important sound cues like parrying, skill attacks, you want a longer tail to make it last longer. In case you don't know, you can create MetaSound presets from a base graph like this. We don't usually make those variations because it really depends on the style of your game, and it will dilute our graph library. The weirdest thing in this graph might be this part. We actually do this a lot in new graphs. The maximum gain here is 10. Like I have said, the amplitude of each modal will be capped between -1 and 1. A large gain like this will saturate some frequencies while boosting others. This will create some distortions in the output. And since this is an oscillator, it will also add a nice vibrating effect. If you compare it with and without the oscillator, very subtle because this effect is very short. Let me change the decay scale to 0.5, and the minimum to 1. Pay attention to that high-pitch long decay one. With the oscillator, those high-pitch long decay modals, which are common in metallic effects, are less painful to hear. So this setup is more flexible with a wide range of input parameters. Okay, for pitch, we simply add some random values to create more variations. Because the amplitude is used to create the distortion effect, we need user gain at the output to control the maximum loudness. In the document, we said that you should avoid doing this, though in this case it's unavoidable. Each time you do an operation on audio, an output audio buffer is created. So this creates 2 480 floating point buffers, around 3.75 kilobytes of memory. It doesn't cost much, so it's okay. But this is the main reason why MetaSounds has so many mixer nodes. Never chain them like this. Just use the one you need directly to avoid redundant buffers. Okay, a little bit off track. But that is everything you need to know about this graph. You can look into Sword Clashes version 2 or Spear and Dagger Clashes to see how we set the parameters for each weapon type. Now about reverberation. In case you don't know, reverb effect is about sound reflecting when hitting the wall of your room, or even the rock on the field. It's like how light hit and reflects the color of objects to your eyes. But the speed of sound is around 343 meters per second, so there is a small delay before you can hear the reverb. It makes sound effects truly exist in the world. I would even say that 2D games need reverb even more than 3D games, because reverb enhances the perception of your scenes. Of course, not all effects need reverb. Mostly loud ones like melee impacts, explosions, gunshots, or footsteps. Since it highly depends on the layout of your scene, we don't add reverb to our effect right inside the graph. In Lyra, gunshot and explosion effects have a reverb layer, and it's mixed based on distance. You can also create a reverb layer right inside a graph by using a delay node and an impact external force node. Like I have said, this node is similar to a convolution reverb. In Unreal, you have a real-time convolution reverb effect in the submix chain. Epic has a detailed documentation for setting this up, so I won't repeat it here. It is a high-quality algorithm, but it's a static solution. So you have to set up the reverb zone and its associated impulse response. You can see a real example set up in Lyra. They use a big volume like this to cover the whole map, then set up smaller volumes inside smaller rooms, with their respective impulse response. Well, this is doable if your level isn't too complicated. Microsoft also has a free reverb plugin for Unreal 5. It's called Project Acoustic. You can find it on the marketplace. The solution is to bake the whole level into a data file, then use it when playing to create the reverb. It gives very impressive results, and it also requires less manual setup. But the catch here is that the baking takes a lot of resources, so it's okay if your scene is small. For big scenes, you need an Azure account for cloud baking. So, not truly free, but good enough for non-open world projects. Well, I'm not a fan of baking. I'm more interested in real-time stuff. The reverb system I like the most is the one implemented by Platinum in Nier Automata. It's an interactive solution. They will do the reverb calculation in real time by tracing collisions around the player every frame, and use collision responses to determine the parameters for their reverb system. I'll leave the link to their GDC talk in the description below if you're interested. They prioritize the listening experience over realistic results, so you can really feel the reverb, and it creates a much better scene perception compared to the static solution from Unreal. This allows the system to change with your scene at runtime, and it works nicely with big scenes. Something very common is modern games. Okay, a little bit too much about reverberation. If all of this seems like too much, don't worry. Your game is still fine, even without reverberation. It's nice to have, not something you must have. And the default solution in Unreal is still very good for most games. I hope you find this tutorial helpful, and I'll see you again on the next one.